Yeah, really good. I really enjoyed the movie. I watched it last night, and it's. I'll just say one thing: I'm never, ever, ever accepting a water in the back of an Uber ever again, thanks to you. So.
Good, good. BYOW, you know.
Yeah. So I'm going to begin just by asking about this idea, sort of where it spawns from, and how long it was with you before you the project got underway.
Well, it's a combination of things. So my co-writer Gene McHugh, he brought to me the idea of a like Uber driver going around killing people as a sort of like minimal horror film. You know, that kind of was about mass murder in America. And then I was like, but why? Like, is he driven by some sort of ideology? Why is the guy doing this? And then when we came upon the idea that, you know, he's just desperate for attention, right? He's killing for views. That's when the story really started to take hold, and we were like, oh, it's presented as a tutorial from like the mind of this very deranged and sort of morally naive person. So yeah, it's that, and you start thinking about this thing, your phone, and the way you understand yourself through your social media and all that stuff, and it just felt like the right way to grapple with it, you know.
I mean, obviously, Joe is great in the lead role. I was just wondering about the casting for that, because I mean, so much of this film hinges on that central performance, and we need someone that very slightly, and I say that lightly, that we do not root for, but we kind of want the best for, and he has that about him. He's something that you get a sense of the kind of deranged aspects of Kurt, but there is a vulnerability there. And how difficult was that to find in the casting process?
Well, I got to give a lot of credit to Joe. I think Joe really took the character there, because in the script, for me, it was meant to be like savagely satirical. And I think Joe was able to find the sort of like pathos and the like humanity in the desperation of the character, because I was really trying to milk the desperation for, laughs, because I wanted the audience to laugh at a white male mass murderer who thinks killing is okay under the guise of sharing or something, so Joe, when we started watching a lot of these videos of wannabe influencers, people who make content that gets 5 views, we started seeing, the sadness and the inherent sort of, desperation as not just comedy, but as sadness. And then that creates an empathy, I think. That pathos creates an empathy for the viewer, where they see themselves. You're like kind of reminded of moments in your life when you feel like, oh, why am I being like this on social media? Oh, I'm being so thirsty or desperate. So Joe really found that in the character.
Yeah. I was wondering too, because obviously it's this film is very pertinent, and it's very much about the kind of the age of social media, but inherently that character actually has something that's existed way before social media, isn't it? You look back to films like the King of Comedy, which has got a very similar kind of this lust for kind of attention, and the lengths people will go to be famous. And did you really play on that as well? Because even though this film is very much ingrained in social media and very much it's so relevant to today, it is actually about more of an inherent human quality, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what social media has done, like, we've always been looking for love as human beings, right? We want that validation. We are social animals. And, social media has basically turned that into a statistical sort of content-based game, right? But yeah, that desperation, that search for love, is part of the human experience. And yeah, you do find it in movies like King of Comedy and Network and To Die For and A Face in the Crowd, movies that are specifically about people desperate for fame, and present as media critiques. And so I think Spree definitely is in the lineage of those types of movies that are media critiques about, monstrous thirst for fame,
And one thing that really struck me when I was watching it was the meticulous details, the comments going on watching I was just wondering, well, someone had to write those. Were you behind? Yeah. How was that sort of process? Because obviously, I imagine it at some points being quite tedious, but did you actually have a bit of fun with it? Because I assume you had to write hundreds at minimum, hundreds.
It's actually about 7,500,
Wow.
7,500 comments,
Yeah.
unique comments with the usernames and stuff. It was extremely tedious and also fun, right? Because my goal was when a viewer is watching at home that they can pause and at any point the comments will, one, make sense, two, offer like an additional laugh for the viewer, and three, provide some sort of psychological context for Kurt. You know, it's almost like a projection of his interiority or something. So yeah, it was lots of nights and weekends, I guess, to answer your question.
Yeah, but and assuming the language had to be so, because it's very nuanced actually to capture that. So I guess sort of quite teen sort of language that people are using today, and all the kind of all the.
I had Twitch, actually, when I was writing the comments, I had Twitch open on a separate window. And so if I felt ever like lost, because I also had to come up with all the usernames and shit. So if I ever felt lost in terms of like, oh, I'm not on a roll right now, I would just turn on the Twitch. I would just look at that for like 5 minutes and be like, okay, that's interesting. Like how, you know, you just have to get into the mindset of each different user for literally 3 seconds and then move on to the mindset of the next user and stuff.
Yeah, and there's always obviously a pressure and responsibility for filmmakers when they create art. But I was wondering, did you feel especially conscious in this instance when you're portraying someone who's doing what Kurt's doing? Because you've got to kind of adhere to the reality and the surrealism as well of the story and show this, and stories like this deserve to be told and have a right to be told, but the balance of not glorifying it and ensuring that it remains satire there's a lot going on. I was just wondering about how conscious you were of that, and if that was quite a nervous proposition when you first got started.
Yeah, I mean, very conscious, tried to be very sensitive to that. I mean, my goal here is to satirize and is to make fun of this type of character. Whereas I think if you watch a movie like Joker or something, you know, that person is beat down to the ground. And then suddenly when they kill someone, all of a sudden they have all this confidence and are feeling good and stuff. And there's no real critique of that. It's weirdly empowering in that way. And I think we're doing the opposite here. I think we're looking at a real type of person in the world, someone who uses violence as a shortcut to attention. And I'm saying, hey, we should make fun of this person. You know, because I've never seen a whatever newspaper editorial or a politician, you know, try to tackle this epidemic of violence by putting that person down a few pegs. You know, you try to analyze these people in a way psychologically or socioeconomically or whatever, other people will see that and be like, they're getting the attention they wanted. And here we wanted to make someone who was a loser. And the violence itself, I think, is not very cool. Like Kurt Kunkle is not a cool psychopath. It's not, even though Natural Born Killers, for instance, I think is a good critique of like, you know, violence in media. It's also very like sexy and appealing and stuff. And our film, I think, is fun, but like the violence is not presented in like a cool or appealing way. It's pretty brutal and pretty detached by the nature of the cameras and just like the formal decisions, you know?
Yeah, no, you're so right. I mean, it's so important to ridicule these people because, like you say, there's that scene I think in Joker towards the end where he's kind of standing up and he's kind of empowered the everyman, you know. And I was watching that, and even though I liked the movie, I felt a bit like a bit of the. Sometimes I think filmmakers can create a situation where a character, if they're kind of not. You know, if they're in society, they're misrepresented or they're not understood. This is a way to be heard. In this instance, it felt more like he is an idiot, which is...
Yeah, and I think, like, look, that doesn't mean that an audience can't, you know, feel themselves in him, right? Because, but when you see Kurt, yourself in Kurt, it should feel kind of cringy and bad, right? He's a reflection of what we don't like about ourselves in our social media usage. When you see yourself in like Joker type character, it's weirdly empowering, you know, like, and that feels icky to me, you know?
So I mean, obviously it's social media is it's just the way of life at the moment, but you've obviously delved into it in this instance, really scrutinized over it to a point where it's quite scary actually, isn't it? If you think about it, because I mean, I'm 31, so I just missed the kind of social media at school side of things, where there's a kind of, the last thing sort of students at school needs is actual stats to almost to compete when it comes to like who's the most popular, so followers or likes and stuff like that. But it's quite scary for the younger audiences, the next generation. I'm just wondering about, having delved into it, your thoughts on what social media is doing to people of that age, because I mean, it's to have like followers and numbers that kind of separate you from your peers is quite unnerving, really.
I think young people, like, you know, Zoomers and stuff, people who were born into it and don't really remember a time before, I think they actually completely understand the kind of improper way that it has sort of colonized our identities to be mediated and to be virtual. And so you find with young people, almost all of them have a public account in which they post, you know, the safest possible material, and then private accounts. And so the fact that they silo their different sort of identities and stuff is actually, you know, almost like a survival mechanism for understanding in a way that maybe millennials and older generations like don't really get. And so, you know, and also I think they feel the exhaustion. Everyone kind of feels this exhaustion, but let's say people who are adults now, right, they have, you know, made this deal with the social media devil that we are now brands. Like every person out there who's an adult is now actually a brand. And so they are scrutinized like a corporation and stuff. And that's a really weird way for a human to exist, because human beings are flawed, you know. Corporations should be scrutinized because their whole end game is to, you know, exploit us for consumer purposes. So they should be criticized. Human beings should not necessarily be perfect. But because we've conflated our personal identity with the idea of branded identity, now we're being treated in that way. So I think it's really damaging for all generations. And actually, I think the youngest generation is the most adept at being able to handle it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah, because in terms of like the ever-changing landscape of social media, I mean, was there a sense of getting spree out there as quickly as possible? Because you get these fads, don't you? And I mean, I'm not for a second suggesting that Uber's going to go anywhere anytime soon. That feels like it's here to stay. But this needed that kind of on your phone, hailing a cab, this culture that we have. And I was just wondering about when you started making spree, if you felt like we need to get this done quickly just in case life changes.
Well, yeah, my co-writer and I were writing it for a couple of years, and then of course you have to raise the money, which is its own challenge. Then, you know, the edit for the movie was not easy, even though we did it pretty fast in 6 months. It was very complicated with all the camera angles and all the graphic design and stuff. But this is not my first time making a film about social media and about technology. And what I learned from my other films, which I've incorporated in them and here, is that if you put a date at the top, so at this movie, it says April 12th, 2019, no matter, and you make the, you know, the graphic design and the you know, just the design elements accurate to that moment in time, no matter when a person is watching the film, it feels accurate. Yeah. So even though people might not be using social media exactly like this in 5 years, the movie will still play appropriately because the audience has that signal at the beginning of the film. Okay, this is this moment in time.
And what was it like logistically shooting via phones, via webcams, and all the different equipment that obviously Kurt uses? You had to, I guess, incorporate yourself. How was that kind of process for you?
It was fun and complicated. It was challenging. You know, GoPro dash cams and iPhones are not intended for feature filmmaking. So we had to come up with our own kind of unique workflows, and, you know, the cameras would crap out in a way that was really unreliable. But it was necessary. You know, I obviously talked to some producers who were like, when are we going to, you know, are we going to start using conventional cameras and lenses and stuff? I said, no, it's not what the story is. And let's do it in the authentic way. And I think the movie is better for, you know, exploiting those formal limitations.
And I think the film looked great on my screen. I think it had a really nice, I think that just as aesthetically it looked really great. But did you find by using kind of GoPros and iPhones and stuff like that, that it actually took away some of the pressure of the kind of cinematography of the movie? Because I guess sometimes you get these beautiful landscapes and sunsets and stuff like that. But when you're deliberately shooting on kind of webcams and on mobile phones and stuff, did you find that that side of it wasn't quite as important, or was it still, was there still a very meticulous attention to detail when it came to the aesthetic of the piece?
Yeah, there was. I mean, look, we shot like a feature film with like where we shut down the freeway and had attack dogs in a junkyard and did it in 20 days, you know, so you're really gunning for time. Obviously the composition and the sort of like mise-en-scène of the thing is important to me. Lighting is something that, you know, is harder to control when you're in an actual moving vehicle and you're, you know, making turns and it's different times of day and stuff. Generally speaking, you know, I knew things that were going to happen, like even adjusting the camera, having the camera auto adjust exposure and making that a conscious choice for one scene versus not making that a conscious choice for other scenes are all things we talked about. Generally speaking, on the internet, in terms of video content, people will basically accept anything. Yeah. So, you know, as long as they can hear it and as long as it's not super buffered, people will accept anything. So I knew that we had that latitude. And then the question is, how do you aestheticize that and turn it into its own sort of like formal beauty? So yeah, I mean, it was maybe different concerns of aesthetics than the normal film would be.
Yeah. And I know he's a bit of a sort of a smaller role in this, but I just wanted to ask about working with David Arquette. And the only reason that's sort of on my mind is because I'm interviewing him tomorrow, and I watched a documentary this morning about him. So he's kind of very fresh on my mind today. So I just wondered, and he seems like such a fascinating guy. How is he to collaborate with on this project?
He's a wonderful guy. He's super creative. He has great improv skills. Joe and Sashi, everyone on the set was really good at improv, which I love and I kind of gravitate towards. And he just got it right away. At our first meeting, you know, I told him Joe and I had been watching and making a lot of cringe compilation videos. And he asked me what that was. And I said, you know, it's these people who are oblivious to the fact that they're constantly embarrassing themselves. And you can see transparently how much they want attention. And they don't get that they're a mocking, like, you know, ripe for mockery. And he's like, I think my whole life is a cringe compilation. And I was like, David, take that and just apply it to this character, please. You know, but he was super fun. And like, you know, we were able to, some of the scenes with David, like where it's Kurt and Chris in the car with the gun and driving up there, we did that in 3 takes, you know, so he's a super pro and I love him.
Oh, hi. So my final question really was just about what's next for you. Have you got any kind of projects underway? I know obviously it's quite hard to shoot at the moment, but are you working on anything even with the foresight to get it done soon?
Yeah, I have a few ideas. Actually, I've been trying to crack a book about a relationship for like maybe a decade that I really like, and it's never made sense to me. And now in quarantine, it actually makes sense to me. So if I can, you know, sort of gather the resources and the team to do that, I like to do that ASAP. But then I have some bigger projects that, you know, also have some things to do with social media and hacker culture and a few other things going on. But nothing like, hey, I'm shooting this tomorrow, Stefan, so here's some intel.
Well, brilliant. Well, best of luck with everything. And thanks for speaking to me today.
Thanks very much. My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey!